Now it's time for Toker Talk Radio, the voice of the marijuana nation.
What are you people? On dope?
Where you can toke.
I inhale frequently.
Or you can talk.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
Or you can toke and talk.
10 federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
While we talk about toke on Toker Talk Radio.
So, by the way, when it comes to pot, if you're 40 years old, you live in a log cabin in Oregon, you got 12 giant pot plants in your backyard, have a ball.
Live from beautiful Portland, Oregon at Rolla J Studios.
Hey, this is great. Just not cannabis.
Plus your calls live at 971-533-7111.
They're walking on their pants with their cap on backwards, listening to Enema Man and Snoopy Poop Dog.
What's to keep somebody from getting all potted up on weed and then getting behind the wheel? Gateway theory doesn't work. It's a reality.
Holland, is it real? Don't tease me.
We're locking up people that take a couple of puffs of marijuana, and the next thing you know, they got 10 years.
And now, here's your host, the guru of ganja graphics, the sultan of sativa statistics, and the worst nightmare of a reefer mad prohibitionist. A polite, perspicacious, productive pothead with a propensity for PowerPoint. Radical Russ Belville.
Oh, yeah. Good day, Tokers and Tokats. Welcome to Toker Talk Radio. We're just actually going to be bringing you a lot of video for this hour. My presentation of the Box Canyon 2013 at the DFW Texas Regional Normal Conference this last weekend. Trends in medical marijuana legislation. Check it out. Coming up right after these important commercial messages from our VIP sponsors.
It's simply business. It's simply business. It's simply business, you know why they won't let us grow. It's simply business.
We'll be right back after these messages from our 420 friendly sponsors. Support these advertisers because their ad money goes straight to the Russ Belville Show. You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
It's simply business. It's simply business. It's simply business, you know why they won't let us grow. It's simply business. It's simply business, you know why they won't let us grow. It's simply business.
The law offices of Omar Figueroa would like to remind you to stand up for your rights. Please do not give up your precious liberties. There's nothing wrong with standing up for our constitutional rights, and in fact, it's the only way to honor the Constitution that recognizes our natural rights. Treat law enforcement with respect and respect the Constitution by standing up for your rights. If you are detained or arrested, stand up for your rights by repeating, I respectfully invoke all my legal and constitutional rights. I do not consent to any search and seizure. I want to remain silent, and I want to speak to my attorney, Omar Figueroa. Omar Figueroa has more than a decade of experience in federal and California courts and graduated from Yale University, Stanford Law School, and Trial Lawyers College. Please contact the law offices of Omar Figueroa at 415-489-0420 or 707-829-0215 or on the web at www.
We're going back to San Francisco. That's right, everyone. The High Times Medical Cannabis Cup is returning to the Bay on June 22nd and 23rd. Come to the Craneway Pavilion in Richmond, California for a High Times celebration of the best weed in the world. Meet the top cannabis businesses of the Golden State. Hear experts discuss indoor and outdoor growing. Find out about cannabis cuisine. Learn about the exciting new world of concentrates. Enjoy a massive medication area reserved for California medical marijuana patients only. And don't forget our swinging Saturday night concert when the stars come out. But as everybody knows, it's all about the cannabis. On Sunday night, we present the High Times Medical Cannabis Cup Awards for Best Sativa, Best Indica, Best Hybrid, Best Concentrate, Best Edibles, and more. Plus, we honor a living legend of the modern cannabis movement, San Francisco's own Dennis Perrone. That's June 22nd and 23rd at the Craneway Pavilion in Richmond, California. Go to medcancup.com for details. Be part of the growing cannabis community.
All right, like I said, my name is Russ Belville. I'm the executive director of 420radio.org, host of the Russ Belville Show, and producer of 16 hours of original content every week on 420radio.org. I've interviewed a lot of the people in this room on the show. We do an interview, we do the news, we do analysis, we do music. It's basically NPR for POT. So if you're into that, I got some flyers right there and some stickers. You can pick them up and learn more about the network and what it's all free. But we do run like a public radio network where we have sponsorship drives and memberships and all that. And for as little as $4.20 a month, you can help keep me doing this. Because I'm only able to do this because of your support. DFW Normal flew me out here. I wouldn't be here without these guys. So thank you so much. All right, so the presentation I have today is called The Box Canyon 2013, and it kind of is the third part of a trilogy. I did this presentation originally in 2010 when I was working for Normal, followed up on it in 2012, and now I've got a follow-up here for 2013. The basic premise here is medical marijuana a path to full marijuana legalization, or is it a path to permanent medicalization? And so what I do in this presentation is I'd like to take a look at the trends that have happened with medical marijuana law, medical marijuana politics, and maybe get you start to thinking about maybe an alternate strategy. So let's take a look at this. Before we get started, I have to issue a few disclaimers because we've had speakers earlier today from Texas Compassion and people who are very strongly involved with the medical movement, and none of this presentation is meant to disparage or deny the medical value of cannabis, of course. I mean, obviously, cannabis is an amazing medicine. If you've ever seen a very sick or disabled person use medical cannabis for the first time, it's like a freaking miracle. You can't believe your eyes when you see it sometimes. There was a great video, I can't remember who the lady was, but it was one of these documentaries where she has, I think it's multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's, one of them where she's trembling all the time and she can't hold her hands steady and she can't talk. And then she smokes a joint and she's like, well, so since I started using cannabis, I've been feeling, I was like, whoa, I mean, it was immediate like that. The trembling, like she takes the joint, she's not even exhaled yet and the tremors stopped. So it's medicine, there's no doubt about that. And of course, we shouldn't be arresting sick and disabled people for using cannabis. That's cruel and unusual punishment. If that's not an 8th Amendment violation, I don't know what is. People like Jonathan Magby in Washington, D.C., who was a paralyzed guy in a wheelchair, they put him in a cell without any of his medicine. He asphyxiated on his own vomit and died in prison for possessing 2 grams of marijuana. So obviously, we don't want to be prosecuting sick and disabled people. Of course, from my point of view, I don't think you should be prosecuting and arresting anybody who uses cannabis, healthy or not. And, you know, we get these terms thrown out, recreational use, medical use, all of this kind of stuff. I like to look at it as personal use. I think it was Cliff mentioned that earlier. It's just personal use. Why you use it is irrelevant. You have the right to use it. But there is a difference between my use, which, you know, if I go without for a couple days, no big deal. Might be a little crabby. But other people go without for a couple days, they could die. So we have to recognize there is that difference, certainly. And of course, if you think everybody should have the right to smoke pot, then you have to support sick and disabled people using pot. I always thought that was so funny when the politics would come out on this and they'd say, oh, you're supporting medical marijuana, but you're one of them legalizers. You're just one of them legalizers. Well, yeah, of course I support medical. What, I'm going to say, no, only healthy people should use it. None for the sick people. Of course legalizers have to support medical marijuana because medical marijuana is actually legalization. And a very limited set of conditions for a very small group of people, but it's a form of legalization. And if you don't have medical cannabis in your state, of course you should fight for a medical cannabis law of some sort. Do what you can to get it passed. But we're going to start taking a look at some of the trends here that might give you an idea of how to deal with the future of medical marijuana. And this is something in Normal we've called the Box Canyon for a while. You know a box canyon, right? That's where, there's a wall on this side, wall on this side, wall in front of you, and there's only one way in and no way out. That's politically what we're talking about a box canyon. And the question is, could medical marijuana become detrimental to the overall cause of legalization? That might sound like a weird question, right? Because, didn't Colorado and Washington have medical and then 12, 13 years later have legal? How could it possibly be detrimental? Well, I'm going to show you that was then 20th century. This is now 21st century, and the politics have changed. We have to frame our medical marijuana arguments the right way. So I'm going to give you a look at what we've used throughout the 20th century and how it's kind of set us into a trap. We're going to look at the different legislation, what has been passing in the 21st century, to give you an idea what the trap looks like. We're going to talk about the politics of this. How could the public mood, because a lot of people have gotten up here and say, 85% of the public supports medical marijuana. What could swing that against us? I'm a cynic. I'm always looking for, I came up and I've had numerous talks with Keith Stropp about, the 70s, and they decriminalized 11 states, and the polls went from 12 to 30%, and the next thing you know, 1978, marijuana will be legal. And then Reagan came, and Just Say No, and the parents' family groups, and all that. There was a big backswing. And I'm a student of history, so I believe, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. So if we don't think about that history of decrim and how the public's will changed like that, we could be subject to that same problem. And how are we going to fight for medical marijuana with an eye toward legalization? Now, people have mentioned this as the old camel's nose under the tent or the Trojan horse. Well, if it's a Trojan horse, it's made of glass because it's obvious what we're doing. We're trying to legalize marijuana, at least for sick people, and if we can get more people, great. So, part of this depends on a concept called framing. It's a neuro-linguistic concept that George Lakoff is one of the major proponents of. Framing, first of all, Lakoff is this guy I'm going to be taking some information from. He says all politics is moral. Somebody earlier today said something about facts, science, reason, and logic, how they're on our side. We've got the facts, the science, the reason, and logic. And if that worked, it'd be legal by now, right? So all politics is moral. People vote and they cast their political identity based on their morals. They vote for what's right and they vote against what's wrong, not what is factual versus false, what is right and wrong. And Otto von Bismarck, first chancellor of the German Empire, said, politics is the art of the possible. You might want to have legalization for everyone, but what's possible? So let's take a look at that. The morality that began in the early 1990s with Dennis Perone and the San Francisco Buyers Club and the first medical marijuana that was going out on the Bay Area, there was a moral framing to that. Because up to that time, through the 70s and the 80s and the early 90s, marijuana was just dope. It's just what dopers smoked. Potheads, stoners, It was just a recreational thing. With all the negative stigma that comes along with that. Now because of that, and I'll give you another Lakoff quote, all politics is moral. Politicians support policies because they are right, not wrong. The problem is that there's more than one conception of what is moral. Furthermore, moreover, voters tend to vote their morality since that is what defines their identity. So when people are voting against pot or say they're anti-legalization, they're not making a calculus in their head. Well, if we legalize pot, then more kids would smoke it, and then there'd be wrecks on the freeway, and then it would be bad, and so I'm against it. No. They're thinking of it as a moral issue. Pot's evil. Oh, it's just bad. You know why? Because it's illegal. You know why it's illegal? Because it's bad. And it's bad because it's illegal. And it's illegal because it's bad. Right? So there's a little moral trap that they're in. And the way to kind of think of this, think of the scales of justice, right? And the way people weigh their options on things. And here in America, we've got a big, strong support for our civil liberties, right? We believe in our civil liberties, our First Amendment, all that kind of stuff. That's a strong American value. But a stronger American value is protecting society from cannabis users, right? We're willing to give up our First Amendment, our Fourth Amendment. I mean, not we. The public is willing to give those things up as long as it's protecting the children, as long as we're protecting society from cannabis users. So what we have to do as reformers is to flip this moral scale to make it immoral not to support marijuana reform. And how can we do that? Give them a better morality to identify with. Alleviate the suffering of the sick and dying. And that was the breakthrough we had in the 90s. We turned it around from, we got to protect society from the pot smokers. Oh, but if they've got cancer, come on, let them smoke. They're suffering. Let's help them out. And that was the moral kind of bargain we made with the voters. We're not talking about legalization. Just these sick people. Just these really sick people. Not legalization, though. Just the sick people. And that worked. And part of the reason it worked is because framing is much more than language or messaging, according to Lakoff. A frame is a conceptual structure used to think with. Frames come in hierarchies, and at the top of the hierarchy are moral frames. People will evaluate morality before they evaluate fact. And all language activates frames in the brain. The more certain frames are activated, the stronger certain moral views get in people's brains. Let me give you a quick example of the neurolinguistics of language. Marijuana. Word association. Marijuana. Give me a word. Awesome. Marijuana. Hot. Pot. Weed. Rope. Joint. Stoner. Cheech and Chong. Whatever, right? Cannabis, though, evokes a different set. For some people, it evokes nothing because they don't know what cannabis is. And that's better than having them come in with a negative framework. But we'll get to that in a second. The big problem with this morality play is this. There's got to be something wrong with you to use marijuana. That's the moral trade-off we made in those early medical marijuana states. We said, there's got to be something wrong with you if you're using marijuana. Now, if you're sick, if that's what's wrong with you, then okay, we won't prosecute you. But you other people that are using marijuana, there's got to be something wrong with you. And we're going to lock you up. So how do we flip that? One of the biggest pet peeves of mine in this movement is this saying, right here. I'm a patient, not a criminal. Seen it almost every state that I've worked in. I'm a patient, not a criminal. Well, guess what, folks? I'm not a patient. So I'm a criminal? That's the problem with that medical marijuana morality frame, is it sets you up in a situation where you are tacitly agreeing with the prohibitionists. You are agreeing that someone who's not a patient must be a criminal. Well, I'm not a criminal, and you're not a criminal. Of course we're not criminals. Here's how we flip that. In the I'm a patient, not a criminal view, you end up with a situation where there's two groups of people. People who are using marijuana, people who are very, very sick and disabled, and where they meet, that little wedge in the center, didn't know we were going back to Venn diagrams, did you? That little wedge in the center there are the people who are too sick to arrest for using marijuana. So what does that leave in the left-hand circle? People who are healthy enough to arrest for using marijuana. Doesn't it sound weird when you say it that way? I can't lock this guy up. He's really sick. But you seem pretty healthy. Off to a cage. Makes no sense. Here's the way I look at it. People who shouldn't be arrested for using marijuana include the personal, the spiritual, and the medical uses. And I put medical in the center because it's the core. We have to help them. Spiritual next to that because that's their religious right. But then personal use, it's all personal use. When you're using marijuana spiritually, it's not Cliff that's using it, it's you. It's personal. How could it not be personal use? And what this has led to is a situation where the states are forced to separate patients from criminals. They're forced to try to figure out who's healthy enough to lock up. And the problem is, when you make your protection based on why you use marijuana, you are tacitly giving the power of someone to decide if your why is good enough. That's not the way rights work. When I have my freedom of speech, people don't say, well, why are you going to give that speech, Russ? Because I feel like it. That's all. It's my freedom of speech. So if we have a right to use cannabis, we can't cede the idea that somebody gets to decide who's good enough, who's sick enough to use this plant. And remember, this is a numbers game. Only about 1 out of 10 consumers of cannabis are medical cannabis consumers. Although Dennis Perone disagrees with me a little bit, he says all use is medical, which it's a whole other thing I don't want to get into right now, but about 1 out of 10 people are medical marijuana consumers. The other 9 out of 10, people like me, they're going to find the loopholes. Not all of them. Some people are very virtuous and they say, I'm not going to get a medical card because I'm just a pot smoker and I believe in my rights. And that's cool. But I can't blame anyone who finds a way to get a card, right? Oh, I looked in my medical records. I had the surgery from 2 years ago. The pain really isn't that bad, but it's good enough to qualify for Oregon. Who's not going to get themselves a card that keeps them out of jail? I can't blame anyone who does that. But that leads to another problem, is those 9 out of 10 people seek these loopholes, and the way our opponents come back with it is, see, those drug criminals are abusing the system. No, they're not. They're still smoking the dope they were smoking before, just now they got a card. And they paid the state $200 for it, and told them where they lived, and told them where they'll be growing, and we'll do that every year, pay the state another $200. Gee, what a crime. But this is the thing. They will frame it as criminals abusing the system, and then that forces the next state to have to come up with more limits to keep the patients and the criminals separate. We saw it in California. California in 1996 came out with medical marijuana, and they had conditions, and at the end of it they have this clause that says, and for any other condition a physician believes marijuana will help, which has opened the door to PTSD, anxiety, depression, hangnail, athlete's foot, whatever you want. In California, you can pretty much get a card. Well, that forced Oregon and Alaska and Washington in '98 to say, oh no, any condition? Oh no, far too many healthy people will get pot if we do that. So they made a list of conditions: chronic pain, chronic nausea, seizures, spasms, cachexia, HIV/AIDS, cancer. Another one, there's 8. And PTSD we just added, by the way. But what we saw is that in '98, those states had to tighten their regulations. And in 2000, Colorado passed a medical marijuana law that's super regulated from seed to sale, because God forbid a gram of marijuana got in the hands of a healthy person. And then eventually technology is going to beat us on this one. Because as long as they keep tightening and tightening and tightening the regulations, eventually someday they're going to come up with a spray or an inhaler or a pill that works just as good, or if not better, than raw plant cannabis. And then where are we? I have to have my plant. Why? We have this inhaler that works twice as well in clinical trials, and your insurance will pay for it. Oh, but I really want the plant. Yeah, you're going to take this. That's what's going to happen. So let's take a look at that. Let's look at these trends here. A great warrior in the medical marijuana movement. If you don't know this man's name, Dr. Todd Mickeria, write it down, look it up. This is one of the fathers of medical marijuana in this country, one of the most important activists we ever had. And he said, cannabis has been categorized in contradictory and diverse ways, subject to political context. Semantic characterizations are important in shaping institutional policy. Now the flip side of that is his rotundity, Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey, who said, and I quote, "We do not want to become a Colorado or California. I don't want this to become a cottage industry for unscrupulous doctors who will write prescriptions no matter what, and for folks who might run these facilities who care more about profit than they care about compassionate care for the individual citizens who try to qualify for it." So Chris Christie, again, is the archetype of we really got to restrict the program to keep the stoners out. And we'll show you how. I made this chart just the other day. This is a chart of the medical marijuana laws in America and how many plants they'll let you grow at home. Your own medicine that you can grow. Now, we start with California. And California, I kind of faded it because there's really not a limit in California. California's law actually says a doctor can recommend as many plants as you need. It could be 99 plants. And if your doctor wrote that down, then you're okay. Well, in '98, Washington, Oregon, and Alaska said, whoa, as many plants as you want? Oh, hell no. Washington limited theirs to what's called a 60-day supply. How much is a 60-day supply of marijuana? Well, for me, it's a lot. But a 60-day supply of marijuana in Seattle turned out to be 6 plants. But in Spokane, turned out to be 2. And in the Tri-Cities, where they really hate pot, it turned out to be, well, bust you anyway. So they made such a loose regulation that the county sheriffs in the different counties could kind of make the law whatever they wanted it to be. Oregon set their limit originally at 3 mature plants, 4 immature plants. Alaska set its at 3 immature, 3 mature. Maine set theirs to 6 plants total. Colorado in 2000, 3 and 3. Hawaii and Nevada in 2000, 3 and 4. So up until 2000, all the way through the 20th century, the trend was limit the number of plants. Let's limit to down to 6 or fewer plants. You know, so the healthy people don't get any marijuana. But then in the 2000s, we had some changes. California had a bill that was actually called SB 420. Isn't that cool? SB 420 set what they call a floor. They said you can have, if you have up to 6 plants and 12 seedlings, then it's definitely medical. But you can still have more than that if your doctor says it's okay. And then these other states, Montana, Vermont, started passing bills with better plant limits. Better plant limits. Oregon, that's close. Oregon changed their law with SB 1085 and made the highest limit in the land, 6 mature plants, 18 seedlings. Rhode Island, 12 plants. New Mexico, 4 and 12. Michigan, 12 plants. Washington finally got around to defining their 60-day supply as 15 plants. And then there's the rest of the graph. I didn't make a mistake. Since 2010, 7 states have passed medical marijuana. Not one of them allows you to grow a plant at home. Not one. Well, a couple exceptions. In Arizona, if you live farther than 25 miles away from a dispensary, you can grow your own. But if you live within 25 miles, they call it the 25-mile halo, you have to shop at the dispensary. You can't grow your own. When I asked MPP about this, by the way, their representative said, well, we had to make the 25-mile halo to ensure that the dispensaries would have a viable market. Because, you know, opening a pot-selling business is very tough. Really hard to build up your customer base, huh? New Jersey, no home grow. And I guess on another slide, I'll save that, hold on. But Arizona's got the restriction on 25 miles. Massachusetts has what's called a hardship exemption, where like if you're too poor or you're too far away from a dispensary, you can ask the government permission to grow your plants and maybe they'll let you. But DC, Delaware, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maryland, no home grow. The Illinois bill that's up right now that might get signed by the governor, no home grow. The New Hampshire bill had home grow. And the governor said, well, I was talking to law enforcement, and I'm not going to sign this until you take out the home grow. And New York, same thing, no home grow. So it looks to me like the trend is, don't let them grow their own medicine. Why would they want to do that? Why would, well, one side, politically, we had to. We couldn't pass it unless we did this. But think of this from the prohibitionist standpoint. What would be their goal of not letting us grow our own plants? Well, part of that goal would be to make sure they have control over the medicine. So that should any future developments come out, like a spray or a tincture and inhaler that works better than pot, they can say, oh, well, guess what? Come to our dispensary. Well, where's all the bud? Oh, we got rid of all the bud. Now we have all these cannabinoid pharmaceuticals tested by the FDA, paid for by your insurance, and work twice as good. The other thing that's happening is we're getting fewer patients able to qualify for these medical marijuana laws. In California, it started off, any other condition. If you had PTSD or AIDS or depression or anxiety or insomnia, you could get a card. Other states went, no. We're going to list this to a very specific list of conditions. But even with the list of conditions, they're upset that too many people are qualifying. In my state of Oregon, every year, there comes across the newspaper some story about the abuse of the medical marijuana program. And you know how they cite the abuse? Too many patients. What other medicine would you say, oh, gosh, I know that aspirin works really good for your headaches, but too many people are using aspirin. It must be abuse. It must be aspirin abuse. Too many people are using aspirin. What? No, if it's working for them, it's working for them. But they characterize it as abuse when more and more and more and more people get on the program, so they try to do things to restrict it. They do things to make it harder for sick people to get medical marijuana. In the Chicago bill, there's no chronic pain. Because one of the things the opponents come back with is they say, oh, all these young healthy people are faking it with chronic pain. They're faking their chronic pain. Because, young guys that work roofing and construction and stuff, they don't have any chronic pain, right? So they took out chronic pain in the Illinois bill and made a list of 33 conditions. And some of them are these scientific names that are really, really long. So there's you're going to have to prove that you have pain. We're going to have to see an X-ray and an MRI and 2 doctors' opinions. And they're just going to make it harder and harder because what? They have to separate the patients from the criminals. Montana went and outright repealed its medical marijuana law. Repealed it. Only the veto of the governor saved it. And then the follow-up bill was such a restrictive bill that the activists in Montana call it repeal light. Their medical marijuana registry went from something like 30,000 patients to something like 3,000 in the span of a year. 30,000 to 3,000 because 27,000 people suddenly got healthy. No, just because they made the hoop so high to jump through that some of the sickest people couldn't jump through it. Oregon, in order to combat our abuse, they raised the medical marijuana program fee from $100 to $200. If you're on SSI, it went up from $20 to $100. Because, you know, people on SSI, they got money to burn. So, and when they did this, the legislature actually said, we're doing this partially to raise money for some other budgets that they couldn't balance, which that right there, oh, so you couldn't figure out your budget, so let's make the sick people pay for it. That's pretty sick, isn't it? But the other side of this, they said, we're going to raise this to $200 to have fewer people register. Now, I thought about the logic of that. Let's assume there's a guy like me who's relatively healthy trying to fake his way onto the medical marijuana program. If it's $100, all right. $200, all right. But that guy on SSI, it's not all right. What they did by raising the price to $200 is weeded out the sickest and most disabled who can't afford the program anymore and did nothing for guys like me or maybe even guys using the system to deal weed, right? I'll sell a bag and make up that $200. So all they do by restricting these laws, and they have to keep restricting them because, again, we got to separate the patients from the criminals, all they do is make it worse for the patients and no less hard for the criminals. In New Jersey, to keep their system all tight and pristine, they don't have just a patient registry, they have a doctor registry. Your doctor has to sign a form with the state that he is recommending cannabis to people. They don't make doctors sign forms for OxyContin or Dilaudid or any of those other things, but if he wants to recommend a safe, non-toxic therapeutic herb, he's got to register with the state. Now, that's turned a lot of doctors off. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be known as the pot doc. And Governor Christie has decided there should be a limit on 10% on the THC in a plant. 10% THC. Or as we call it back in Oregon, swag. If it's medical, you want it to be more THC, more CBD. You want more cannabinoids. That's the medicine. That's like saying, oh, we only want an aspirin pill that's 10% salicylic acid. Why? And then finally, this Illinois one, in addition to those 33 conditions that they require, a 30 or a 90-day relationship with your doctor, which, if you don't know about medical marijuana states, a lot of times what happens is, if I go to my regular doctor, my regular GP, and I say, hey, I'd like to try cannabis, he'll probably say, get out of my office. Because they have prescription pads that are signed by the DEA, and any talk of Schedule I drugs makes them scared of being on that registry. And in a lot of places, the doctor likes cannabis and would recommend it, but he can't, or she can't, because they work for the VA, or because they work at a hospital that gets federal grants, or because they work for a clinic that has a drug testing policy or an insurance policy. There's a million excuses why regular doctors won't recommend cannabis, so a lot of people get their records from their regular doctor, take it to a clinic like THCF, like Ultimate Choices, we got a bunch of them, that specialize in medical marijuana to get their card. And you know what our opponents do with that? In Oregon, they say, 80% of all medical marijuana cards are signed by 5 doctors. Yeah, that's kind of like saying 100% of the abortions in Wichita are performed by one guy because there's only one guy, right? Same with medical marijuana. The reason a few doctors write so many recommendations is because the other doctors can't or won't. So it's a stupid argument they make. Now, how could this pendulum swing back on us? How could people be against medical marijuana when it seems to be so popular? Well, you remember Barry McCaffrey, the old drug czar? He said, I think it's nonsense. This is mostly Cheech and Chong show for the quasi-legalization of marijuana. And then Judge Judy, who once said, don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining. And the reason I bring these up is because there's beginning to be a bit of don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining with respect to medical marijuana. And again, I'm not demeaning the medical utility of marijuana. I'm talking about the politics. You hear it all the time. People talk about, oh, they're faking it, they're faking it. The latest poll that came out and said that medical marijuana enjoyed 85% support in America also said 30% of the people thought that it was being used for legitimate medical purposes. So a large group of the people who support medical marijuana, they know that a lot of people aren't really medical, but they still support it. But how could this swing back on us? Medical marijuana is a hoax. Mayor Bloomberg of New York City just said this. He actually said medical marijuana is a hoax, especially if it's in a 64-ounce Big Gulp cup. That's a Bloomberg joke. Anyone? All right. Well, here's why he thinks this. I go to medical marijuana events all over the West Coast, billed as medical this or medical that. Most people don't enter raffles or use vending machines to get their medicine, but they do with medical marijuana. Most people don't gather in large groups to have judging competitions on their medicine. Welcome to the 2013 Insulin Cup, where we all get together and compare insulin and make sure we got the best. Who makes the best insulin? Well, to the general public, this seems like a hoax to them. Most people don't take ridiculously large doses of medicine, like the 12-foot vapor bag or the quarter-pound joint. Most people say, oh, really? Medicine? Really? Most medicines don't advertise by price. I know you're all jealous. This is $45 for top shelf eighths. I know in Texas you're all going, really? Yeah, 45 bucks an eighth. Oh, it's a 4-gram eighth, by the way, not a 3.5 gram. And finally, most medicines aren't sold through sex appeal, except Viagra. Those are the 420 nurses. They're at almost every event in what I call medical shorts. They're not hot pants, they're medical shorts. They're there in their medical shorts, their low-cut tops, they got the little, porn set nurse's hat kind of thing. And the mainstream sees that and goes, yeah, right, medical, sure. Now, this is the reality we live in out on the West Coast, and the unfortunate thing is this reality infects the East Coast, and this is what Chris Christie and all those guys on the East Coast don't want to see happen with their medical marijuana. The other danger is that pharmaceuticalization is coming. Remember our little Venn diagram. People that use natural cannabis and get arrested for it, and the people who are very sick and disabled, and where they meet, we have people we don't arrest for cannabis. But soon enough, we've got FDA trials underway for Sativex. It's a spray. It's a THC CBD spray. Works very well for multiple sclerosis and other issues. There are other inhalers and pills that are currently in development. Health and Human Services of the federal government actually backs a change in scheduling for marijuana if it's going to be used for cannabis pharmaceuticals. This is amazing. THC in the marijuana plant is illegal. It's a Schedule I drug. When they make Marinol and the Schedule III legal pot pills, they make a synthetic THC. They do a bunch of chemical, bend a molecule here, and they make a synthetic THC. Well, the poor pharmaceutical companies have been complaining about that. Gosh darn it, it's so hard to make these synthetic things. Can't we just use the natural THC? And Health and Human Services actually backs a rule change that says if a pharmaceutical company gets some THC from the plants grown in Mississippi, well, then we'll call it Schedule III. But if you grow a plant and get some THC from it, why, that's Schedule I and you go to federal prison. Amazing. Pharmaceutical corporations have more rights than we do to this plant, at least in the government size. And remember that moral conflict. The original moral conflict that got us medical marijuana was, you can't let the cancer patients suffer. My God, what kind of jerk are you? How dare you let this cancer patient suffer? Oh, you're the worst person ever. Well, that's a moral conflict, and that's what caused those voters that hate pot. They went, well, yeah, I hate pot, but gosh, cancer, that's awful. Well, as soon as all these sprays and inhalers and stuff come about, those people start using the cannabinoid drugs, And the rest of us are left out by ourselves as people to arrest for cannabis. These new cannabinoid drugs will give the patients all the relief they get without the pesky high. They always call that a side effect. The high of cannabis is a terrible side effect because, you know, people in pain with cancer, they shouldn't feel good. They shouldn't be happy, right? And if we end up in this situation, we are left in the same moral space as people who abuse prescription medications. We will be looked at like the OxyContin abuser or the cough syrup chugger once this happens. And fighting only for medical kind of paints you into a corner eventually. If you said, I'm a patient, not a criminal, and now you're backing a legalization effort, so now you're for the criminals? What? You said they were criminals before. People who said medical marijuana isn't a Trojan horse for legalization. No, this is just legal, this is just medical, has nothing to do with legalization, it's a separate issue. And then our opponents go, Colorado, Washington, they had medical and it became legal. So that's a hard argument for us to make anymore, that it's just about medical, because they can point to 2 states and say, really? People who said we need a doctor's permission to use cannabis. We're going to make a cannabis regulation. You have to get a doctor's permission slip. You have to get a recommendation. And then you go fight for legalization. What changed? Did cannabis get less dangerous? Did cannabis get less of a problem? No. So now they're wondering, well, were you BSing us back then when you were asking for the doctor's notes? Or was that just political expediency? Now we get kind of trapped there. People who dismiss the high of marijuana. I love this. Somebody earlier today said medical cannabis patients don't smoke marijuana to get high. They use it for medicine, which I agree with. But I fail to understand how the same herb that I smoke and that you smoke makes me high and you not. I don't buy that. Now, I do buy that people get tolerant, but I've been smoking longer than most cannabis patients have. I'm as tolerant as they are. Whatever effect I'm feeling, they're feeling. It's one plant. It does not change. If I am standing with a Rastafarian, a patient, and myself, and we pass a joint, it does not go from being sacrament to medicine to dope. It's the same plant. It's the same joint. And folks that are trying to expand the medical access, well, let's add more conditions. Let's make it easier to get on the program. Let's make it so more people can get involved there. Once again, still leaves you in the space of tacitly admitting that healthy people need to go to jail. And the Dennis Perrone claim of all use is medical, all use is wellness falls flat when most people hear it. Although I kind of believe it's true in a limited way. I think cannabis is almost like a nutrient or a vitamin like that we take for preventing bad things from happening. I think that's a better argument than all use is medical, because when you say all use is medical, you activate the frame of medical, which activates doctors and lab coats and pill bottles and all those things. So I would get away from all use is medical and maybe go toward wellness or prevention. All right, so I brought up all these problems. Now you're probably thinking, oh my God, Russ, we're never going to get legalization in Texas. We're going to be lucky if we can get medical. Now you got us all worried about this medical. Well, I'm a cynic by nature. Part of this is just to get you thinking about the paths that could be taken. I'm going to show you now how you can fight for medical with an eye toward legalization so you don't get caught in these traps later. Don't think of an elephant. What'd you just think of? I'll bet none of you thought of a rhinoceros. And the idea behind don't think of an elephant is the idea that a phrase or a term lives in a frame. And even negating that frame activates that frame. If I say, here's the perfect example. The perfect example of using a frame where you're saying one thing and everybody believes you're saying something else. Some of my older audience know this one. I am not a crook. What did you just think Nixon was when he said that? A crook, right? You can't negate a frame. You have to go around it. You have to repaint things. And this is what I'm going to show you. And then let's remember the words of Francis L. Young. Marijuana in its natural form is one of the safest therapeutically active substances known to man. We got that quote because Normal sued the DEA, and that's what we got out of it. Didn't get any change in law, but at least we got them to admit that it's medicine. So let's go back to our moral dilemma. We allow medical marijuana because it alleviates suffering for patients. And that's more important than protecting us from the healthy dopers. How do we flip that morality? Because again, politics is moral, has very little to do with fact, science, reason, and logic. How do we flip the morality on them? I think this is the way we do it. Medical marijuana laws treat patients like second-class citizens. Do you know any medical insulin patients? Do you know any medical OxyContin patients? How come marijuana is the only one we say medical marijuana patient, as if the person is sick with marijuana? You know, other patients are known as cancer patients, diabetes patients, you know. We don't call them patients based on the drug they take, we call it based on the affliction they suffer. Only marijuana does this. So what we do is we reframe this to say, by creating medical marijuana laws, you are discriminating against the sick and disabled, which sounds weird at first. What? But check it out. Here's how this works. Under medical marijuana laws, patients still lose their jobs, their housing, their child custody, organ transplants, right to a firearm. They put on pain contracts so that they can't get their oxy if they pee positive. All sorts of health care options are restricted for them. In some states, they're passing drug testing for welfare, for unemployment. So if you're a sick person on cannabis, you're a second-class citizen. You're being treated Jim Crow. You got a separate water fountain. Patients in the states that allow home grow are victims of home invasions if they're growing marijuana in their neighborhoods. Patients are forced to pay inflated prices for medical marijuana because the black market dictates what the price is. If 9 out of 10 smokers are paying $300 an ounce, then 1 out of 10 smokers are going to end up paying $300 an ounce. That's the way economics works. And this is the one that sticks the most for me. Patients can only use cannabis as a last resort. That's another thing the medical marijuana frame has brought to us, is this idea that, well, all right, you tried the oxy, you tried the Dilaudid, you tried the surgeries. I suppose now we can let you use some marijuana. When really, as safe and non-toxic as it is, it should be the first thing people are trying, not the last. But as long as we have to separate the patients from the criminals, it can't be their first resort because that's what criminals do. And a patient is always considered guilty until proven patient, right? When the cop pulls you over and he smells the pot, you're a criminal at that moment until you can prove you're not. I don't think any patient is a criminal, and they shouldn't have to prove anything. Nobody should have to prove anything. So how are we going to flip this? Oh, one more point. Not every deserving patient will get on the medical marijuana program. My ex-wife still runs a clinic in Oregon. She had to deny a medical marijuana card to a hospice patient with 2 months left to live. Obviously qualified. I forget what the condition was. But guys in hospice, 2 months to live, could not give that person a medical marijuana card because that person couldn't go get their medical records from their doctor and bring them in and pay the fee and all that stuff. So a person who perfectly qualifies, but because of the hurdle of the money or the hurdle of the doctor or whatever, they can't clear that hurdle, and a very deserving person suffered for the last 2 months of their life because they couldn't get on the program. So this is the moral frame that we set. We wish to end injustice and discrimination. We need to point out that no matter what we do with the medical marijuana law, someone's going to find a loophole in it. When they find a loophole, they're going to be considered a criminal abusing the system. The next state has to come up with a stricter medical marijuana law. More people get left behind, and the cycle keeps on repeating itself to the point where, like I said, now in the Illinois bill, you got to have very strict conditions. And I always like to say this: all use is none ya. None ya damn business. I'll use it for whatever reason I choose. I'm sick, I'm religious, I'm healthy, I just want to have a good time on a Saturday night. All use is none ya. Let's turn marijuana back into the right that it is and get it away from all this moralization. People don't have to like us for smoking pot. People don't have to like pot. I don't like kimchi. I had a Korean neighbor once, cooked kimchi. You ever smelled that stuff? Oh, worst stuff, right? But that's your right. You're right. So it was a little smelly. I can get over that. You have a right to cook kimchi. Even though it affected me a little bit, that's the right. And we need to get this back to a discussion of rights. Why are we restricting people's right to use this cannabis plant? And why are we trying to make sick people jump through hoops that they don't have to jump through? So let's embrace legalization. It's not a Trojan horse. It's trial legalization. If you come out with a medical bill and they say, oh, it's a Trojan horse. You're trying to legalize pot. Say, yeah, for sick people. We're trying to legalize pot for sick people. And then maybe healthy people later, but let's not even talk about that now. Let's talk about the sick people. Don't rush away or try to say, no, we'll never legalize, because you don't believe that, do you? You want to legalize, don't you? Come on now. And they can feel that. They can sense that. And if they come back with these threats of abuse, like in Oregon when they say you're abusing the program, I always like to say they're not abusing. They're eager to comply. They want to be legal. I mean, what kind of abuse is it when a guy who was a pot smoker then goes to a doctor, gets his medical records, goes to a second doctor, gets a recommendation, goes to the state and pays $200, tells the state where he lives, agrees to follow certain limits on the marijuana that he uses, tells the state where the marijuana is being grown, and does this every year. Wow, that's some abuse. That's some real abuse there, isn't it? $200 a pop. The state of Oregon made $1 million on their surplus. Every year they run a surplus on their medical marijuana program. So it's not abuse of the system. It's people who want to follow a law. And then you can transition that into, hey, look, if these guys are so desperate to go see a doctor and pay $200 just to follow a law, why don't we just make it legal and let them follow that law? That's a way that you can kind of jiu-jitsu that into legalization. And then finally, the all uses none. It's not about just a medicine. It's a personal choice. Doesn't matter whether pot heals me or not. It's my personal choice. And the pharmaceuticalization that's coming, we can fight that by getting them away from the smoking. They want to stick it to smoking. No medicine is smoked. Smoked marijuana is not a medicine. It's never smoked. You'll notice they always say smoked. So get them out of that. Say very few medical marijuana patients smoke. Most use tinctures or vaporizers or capsules. Also, we can demonize Big Pharma. We can use that fear against the pharmaceuticalization of cannabis. Say, why should patients have to wait for a 3-year FDA trial for a pill that's going to be marked up 15,000% when they can plant a seed and heal themselves? Yeah. We can emphasize that planting your own marijuana is a self-sufficiency angle. And it's a safety angle. We can point out that it's so much safer than the pharmaceutical drugs. It's therapeutic. Exactly. Oh yeah, planting and growing itself. I've talked to so many patients who, they say being able to get into that garden and get in the dirt and feel something living and growing at my hands is so therapeutic, especially people at their end of their lives, those hospice situations, gives them something to look forward to. Absolutely. And then the other thing I like to do is when they start talking about Sativex or any of these cannabinoid pharmaceuticals, co-opt that. So yeah, these cannabinoid pharmaceuticals are great. So the real thing must be pretty good too, huh? Right? It's always amazed me that they can say that the raw plant's Schedule 1, but once we put it in a pill, it's Schedule 3. Seems kind of the opposite. Also, they like to say, we don't smoke opium to get the benefits of morphine, so why should we smoke cannabis to get the benefits of marijuana? I like to say, yeah, we don't chew willow bark to get aspirin either, but we don't arrest anybody that chews willow bark. We don't arrest anybody that grows willow trees. Just because it's not the most efficient way to get aspirin doesn't mean it's an illegal way to get aspirin. And that's what we need to do, make that comparison with cannabis, right? Don't be against the cannabinoid pharmaceuticals, because those could help people. I mean, that'd be great. But alongside regular cannabis, not instead of natural cannabis. And I like the marijuana-marinol hypocrisy, right? Marijuana, 10 to 20% THC in a bud, deadly Schedule 1 substance. Marinol, 100% THC in a pill, Schedule 3. Huh? That makes no sense at all. It's the only situation in the entire U.S. pharmacopoeia where the more potent drug is on the lower schedule. Only situation. And remember, it's not if we're going to fight for medical marijuana, because obviously we have to, but how we fight for medical marijuana is going to make the difference. This is a civil rights fight, so I'd like to quote Rosa Parks, who said, "The only tired I was tired of giving in." And the legendary Jack Herer, who said, "You live 2 years longer than people that don't smoke and don't drink, and 8 to 24 years later than people that do. You got to be out of your mind not to smoke dope." So it's not if we fight, but how we fight that gets us all to the full legalization of marijuana. I'm Radical Russ Belville. This presentation is available online, as are all of my presentations at 420radio.org. You're welcome to download them, use them how you like. Thank you for having me out. Thank you. Thank you.
We'll be right back after these messages from our 420 friendly sponsors. Support these advertisers because their ad money goes straight to the Russ Belville Show. You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
So, Sarah, what's going on here? Sarah? Sarah?
She won't answer you. Or she can't.
Why not?
This is the way it's been since she started smoking pot. She's all lazy and boring and... You know, we used to have so much fun together.
And now?
This is what we do.
Herb Thrasher from the Herb Thrasher Flower Hour. Now get ready for Herb Age Designs for the proud cannabis consumer. Herb Age Designs, lifestyle gear for the 420 friendly. Herb Age Designs, home of the famous lighter leash. Herb Age Designs, get your Herb Age t-shirts and hoodies and show your pride. Herb Age Designs, we've got frisbee golf discs and durable hemp gear. Herb Age Designs. We've got shot glasses, drinking glasses, coffee mugs, and beer cozies. Check us out on Facebook and online at herbagedesigns.com. And follow Herb Age and Herb Thrasher on Twitter. We'll see you at this year's Hemp Fest. Crank it up.
With that cat there?
Must be full of reefer.
Full of reefers?
Yeah, man.
You mean that cat's high?
Sailing.
Sailing?
Sailing lightly.
Get away from here. Man, is that the reefer man?
That's the reefer man.
I believe he's losing his mind.
I think he's lost his mind.
Talking to that reefer man.
Well, that was a great presentation. Russ brought us from the DFW Normal Conference there, legal conference. Hopefully we'll be back again tomorrow for another great live show. If not, we'll have more videos from Russ on his trip. I appreciate you all tuning in for the show and hope that you join us again next time here at 420radio.org for Toker Talk Radio and the Russ Belville Show. For Russ Belville, this is Brian the Red. And as always, take care of each other, Tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.